Linda collapsed, not from illness, but from 30 years of invisible sacrifice that had just suffocated her in the cold kitchen. Her heart no longer hurt from her body, but from the harsh truth she had been avoiding. No one in this house truly needed her, except herself. In the next 30 seconds, she realized that she was no longer the perfect wife and mother her family expected. She was just a woman drained, lost in her own life. Now, standing amid the shattered pieces of expectations and silence, Linda was forced to make a final decision. This was a battle not to protect the family, but to rebirth herself. And when Linda chose to love herself, that was when her entire family would have to pay the price for the change. Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. My name is Linda. I'm 65 years old, and what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. The pain began as a vague, gentle yet distinct sensation. At first, I thought it was just a sign that my body had grown too tired after a long day. A sudden, fleeting pang, quickly disappearing, almost as if it were nothing to worry about. I sighed, shaking my head at myself. This wasn't the first time I had experienced such a feeling. Over the years, I had thought I had grown used to the warning signs my body gave me. But this time, the sensation was different from all the others. I stood in the kitchen, my hands moving quickly to crush garlic, chop vegetables, and cook. My kitchen had always been the place where I felt most at peace. The soft yellow light from the bulb reflected off the shiny floor, and the smell of food from the dishes I was preparing filled the air, making me feel as though I were living in a familiar space. I loved that feeling, the feeling of taking care of my family, of silently shouldering the effort I placed upon myself. But suddenly, another pain hit. This time, it was stronger, more pronounced. My head spun, and my chest tightened as if someone were choking me. The sensation was so intense that it couldn't be ignored. My body began to resist. I tried to stay upright, but my legs trembled, unable to maintain balance. It felt as though I was drifting away, further from everything familiar. I vaguely realized I was about to fall, and before I could react, I collapsed onto the kitchen floor. The cold tile beneath me was so chilling. It felt like it was seeping into my skin, causing more pain than the ache in my chest. The air around me grew faint. The soft yellow light seemed distant, as though it were hiding a truth I didn't want to see. At this moment, I could no longer hear anything except the beating of my heart. My heart raced, but it didn't provide me with any comfort. I looked up at the ceiling, trying to breathe evenly, but my breath became heavier, more difficult. My head spun, and I could no longer hold on to my thoughts. This sensation was too terrifying. In that moment, I thought of Mark, not because I thought he could help me, but because I needed a little comfort, a word of concern for my son. Even though deep down, I knew he would never understand what I was feeling. But still, I thought I should call him, do something to get something, anything from my family. I took the phone from my pocket, my hands shaking so much that I couldn't dial the number correctly. After a struggle, I managed to dial Mark's number. I heard the ringing tone in the silence, the ringing stretching on, each ring like a beat of my heart. In that moment, I realized something strange. Despite being his mother, I felt so distant, so alone. "What's wrong, Mom?" Mark's voice came through the phone, but I couldn't feel any concern in it. His tone was unchanged, cold and distant, with no sign of worry or care. Everything became blurry, like a sound from a far-off place. I tried to take a breath, but I couldn't. Breathe! My chest felt like it was being squeezed by someone. Son, I think something's wrong with me, I said between gasps. I feel pain in my chest. On the other end of the line, I heard lively voices, apparently from Katie's friends, as they were celebrating a birthday together. My daughter, Katie, was the one child who always made me smile, no matter how tired I was. But now, I realized that my family was no longer a family. It was all just a game, a play where I was merely a supporting character. I had given my whole life to this family, but when I needed them the most, they abandoned me. They couldn't see the sacrifices I made, couldn't see the sleepless nights I endured just to make them happy. But it's Katie's party, Mom, Mark said indifferently, his voice still cold as if he didn't care. I'll call back tomorrow. You'll be fine, Mom. You're always fine. His words were like a slap to my face. I had loved and sacrificed for this family all my life. Yet now, I was left with nothing but silence and indifference from the people I had given everything to. No words of encouragement, no inquiries, nothing at all. I looked down at the phone, hearing the beep as the call ended. I sat there, still holding the phone, a sense of emptiness flooding over me. Not because I doubted he would come, but because I had come to realize a very clear truth. I had given everything to my family, but all I received in return was neglect. It made me wonder, am I still even a part of this family? The whole kitchen around me now felt cold. The warm light couldn't hide the truth that I had become a shadow in my own life. This kitchen, this dining table, everything seemed to have lost its meaning. I had lived fully for my family, sacrificed everything, but in return, I only received loneliness. The pain still lingered, but at this point, I no longer just felt it physically. The pain had sunk deep into my heart, into my soul. And in that moment, I realized something. I no longer wanted to live like this. I no longer wanted to be a faint shadow in my children's lives. I had sacrificed too much, and now it was time for me to live for myself. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew I had to change. I couldn't keep living in the indifference of those I loved. That was the truth, and I had to accept it. Tears began to fall, but I didn't feel weak. No, these were not tears of helplessness. They were tears of awakening. I had lived a life of sacrifice for others, but now I knew I needed to live for myself. And that was when I felt something new in my heart. Anger, disappointment, but also a sense of liberation. As the pain in my chest began to subside, I lay down on the floor, but my mind couldn't stop. Everything around me faded, becoming unclear, yet images of the past began to appear sharply. I saw myself in those moments when everything I did had only one purpose: to keep this family close together, even at the cost of my own sacrifice. I remembered the early days when I had to work hard to support Mark. Even though he was young, I always tried to teach him about responsibility. I once stood in a bank office, signing a loan contract for money I would never be able to repay. But for Mark, I did it all. I convinced myself that one day he would grow up, understand what I had done for him, and feel the sacrifices I had endured. But now, I'm not sure if he truly understands everything I did. He always says he loves me, but the truth is, his love wasn't enough to see the efforts I made. Once, I had to borrow money from friends just to pay his rent. At that time, I didn't want him to worry about money. I didn't want him to feel like a failure. I thought I could handle everything. I could take care of the loans, the bills, everything. And I also believed I would never lack anything. But then, one day, I realized that while I was worrying about everything else, I had forgotten to worry about myself. Another time, when Mark was struggling at work, I sat with him all night. He couldn't find stable employment. He had failed too many times, and I saw him begin to lose faith in himself. I couldn't let him fall. I sat up, held his hand, and told him not to give up. I had to borrow words of encouragement from the stories I had heard, the phrases I had read somewhere, just to make him feel that he still had hope, that everything would get better. I did everything to help him get back on his feet every time he stumbled. But during that time, I wondered if I could have some strength of my own. Could I stop and think about myself instead of always worrying about others? Another memory came to mind. It was when Mark's car broke down after a traffic accident. I remember that day so clearly. He called me from the side of the road, his voice frantic, his hands shaking. "Mom, the car broke down. I don't know what to do." I rushed over, despite the pouring rain, trying to fix the car with whatever I had. I wasn't a mechanic, but I still tried, still wanted to do everything so that he could feel at ease. Even though the car was just an old vehicle, I knew it was the only connection between him and me at that moment. But when everything was done, when the car could run again, I felt a sense of emptiness. Mark just thanked me casually and hurried off, not realizing that I had done everything just to give him some peace of mind, not for the car, but for him. The last scene in this chain of memories was when I sat in the living room, wrapping a birthday present for Katie. Although I didn't have much money to buy expensive gifts like her friends, I still took the time to find small but meaningful presents. Each gift was a reminder of my love for my daughter. I remember that time when I tried to bake a cake on my own, even though I wasn't a professional baker. I packed all my love into each detail, each small gift I could make for her. Katie smiled brightly when she received those gifts, but I knew deep down that I was seeing part of the emptiness. My daughter didn't truly recognize that what I did was a part of my unspoken sacrifice. And when I looked into her eyes, I didn't see the appreciation I had hoped for. Yet, I still did it. I continued to sacrifice, even though at times I felt exhausted. Those days passed quickly, but they weren't easy. Looking back, I can't count how many times I had to push aside my own desires just to please others. How many times I accepted letting go of my dreams to care for the family, to meet all of Mark and Katie's wishes. The price I paid was an absence of joy, an absence of freedom, and more importantly, an absence of myself. My whole life had been bound up in that sacrifice. But now, when I look back, I can't help but ask myself, were these sacrifices truly worth it? Can I continue living a life like this, never having a chance to live for myself? I had dedicated my entire life to taking care of them, but I realized a painful truth. What I received in return was only indifference, not the love I thought I would get, not the sincere care I had hoped for. As the images in my memory slowly faded, I stood up, still feeling the exhaustion and pain. But another feeling also began to form inside me: determination. I couldn't continue living in that meaningless sacrifice anymore. It was time for me to change. It was time to stop and take a hard look at myself. I needed to live for myself. This was the moment I decided that I would not let myself continue sinking into silence and invisibility. I needed to do something to live authentically, to no longer live for others at the expense of myself. And from this moment on, I would begin the journey to find myself. Every time I wake up in the hospital room, the silence makes me feel as though I've been transported to a strange, unfamiliar space. My mind is still foggy, but fragmented memories keep drifting through my thoughts. First, there was the chest pain, a sharp pain, as if someone were pulling a rope tight around my heart. But then, pain wasn't the only thing that woke me. It was the stillness that made me feel uneasy. This hospital room feels like a prison. There's no sound except for the machinery, my labored breathing, and, occasionally, the footsteps of a nurse or doctor. I look out the window but only see a gray sky and heavy clouds rolling in. It seems that even the rain couldn't wash away the gloom in my heart. My vision blurred for a moment, but when I opened my eyes again, I saw that I was still lying in a cold room. The hospital, a place I thought would heal me, had become a place that imprisoned my soul. Everything around me felt lifeless. The curtains drawn tightly, the stark white walls, and the harsh fluorescent lights made the space even colder. The loneliness in this room was like a bundle of ice, tightening around my heart. I think of Mark. His silence over the past months, the rare phone calls, the times I called and he was never there, the times he hastily refused when I needed him most. I remember the last time he called me, just to say, "It's Katie's birthday, Mom. You'll be fine. You're always fine." His words kept repeating in my head. He must have become too accustomed to my sacrifices, and in truth, I had grown used to it as well. I had lived my whole life in silence and meaningless sacrifice, but I couldn't let it continue. I couldn't keep living, just hoping that one day Mark would realize he had been wrong. The question keeps echoing in my mind. Why do I keep giving when I get nothing in return? I had spent my youth nurturing the family, caring for him, but in the end, I realized I was just an insignificant part of his life, unnoticed, unimportant. No one visits me. No one checks on me. I lie here, alone in this cold room, staring at the white ceiling and seeing nothing but swirling thoughts. I suddenly realize that I've neglected myself for far too long. I've sacrificed everything for the family, for Mark and Katie, but none of it has been acknowledged. Not out of selfishness, but out of the weariness of a person who no longer knows who they are, who no longer knows what they want. The cold in this room isn't just from the surroundings, but also from my soul. I've lived my whole life taking care of others without ever thinking of myself. That is the price I've had to pay. The price of meaningless sacrifice. I remember the years when I struggled to take care of Mark, the nights I stayed up, comforting him, wiping his tears, hoping that he would realize my love. But did he understand that love is not just about giving without expecting anything in return? Is anyone coming to pick you up? The nurse entered the room, looking at me with a gentle yet indifferent gaze. Her question brought no comfort. It was just a casual question, and I didn't know how to answer. No, no one is coming to pick me up. I don't need anyone to pick me up. I don't need pity. But why does that loneliness feel like a knife cutting into my heart? That feeling made me think of the times Mark called only when he needed money, when he was in trouble, when he couldn't manage things on his own. But when I needed him, when I was tired, when I needed a little care, he was never there. I don't blame him. I've gotten used to sacrificing without ever receiving anything in return. But the more I think about it, the clearer it becomes that I cannot live like this anymore. I need to do something. I can't keep living as a shadow in my own life. When the doctor walked in, I only felt the coldness. I had been lying here for so long in this space, among the unceasing thoughts about the past and my sacrifices. And I realized it was time for me to change. The question, who am I, seemed to be tormenting me. Who am I when I'm no longer the sacrificing mother? Who am I when I don't have to live for others? Who can I be when I'm no longer living in the shadow of those around me? The doctor continued giving instructions, but I no longer heard what he was saying. I was in a different world, a world where I had to find myself. And although I didn't know what to do next, I felt deep inside that I couldn't keep living in that sacrifice. I couldn't live forever in the darkness of indifference. I didn't need pity. I just needed to find myself again. When the doctor left, I was alone in this room again. No one came to visit, no one called. This feeling was painful, but there was a part of me, weak though it was, that felt a sense of freedom. Perhaps this is my chance to find myself. Not to be loved, not to please anyone, but to live for myself. I no longer want to be an invisible mother, a wife who only knows sacrifice, a woman whose existence no one recognizes. It's time for me to live for myself. This feeling, the feeling of awakening, of a woman deciding not to give any more but to receive love from myself, to receive the respect I had lost so long ago. It's time for me to live for myself, not for anyone else, because I deserve to have a meaningful life. I closed my eyes, but not out of fatigue, but because I felt ready for a new journey, a journey I couldn't take with those I had sacrificed my whole life for. I had to walk alone, and this time, I would do it for myself. When I left the hospital, a sense of emptiness enveloped me. I couldn't explain why, but as I stepped out of that cold room, I felt like I was entering an entirely different world. It wasn't the world of sacrifice or the world of old relationships, but a world I had never dared to enter before, the world of myself. I walked out of the hospital, my steps light but more determined than ever. The chest pain had subsided, but what made me feel different was what I felt inside. I no longer felt bound by anyone, not by my son, not by Katie, not by the expectations I had set for myself over the years. When I got home, no one was there to greet me. No Mark, no Katie, just me and the empty space in the house I had spent my whole life taking care of. The house still bore the marks of the years gone by. The decorations I had placed in every corner, the family photos on the walls that I had arranged to make everything look perfect. But now, all of it had become faded memories. They no longer held any meaning. As I stepped through the door, I felt the coldness of this space. The coldness wasn't from the weather outside, but from the silence. The coldness of a person who was no longer loved, no longer cared for. This was the home where I had nurtured my family, where I had done everything to keep everything intact. But now, it was just a place I had to return to in order to find myself. I walked into the living room, where I had spent countless hours with my family. I had sat for hours cleaning, preparing meals, and taking care of things for the family. But now, everything was silent. There was no one sitting on the sofa, no laughter from Katie, no casual conversations with Mark. The empty chairs, the unused items on display, everything seemed to reflect my own life. I stood there for a long time, looking at the armchairs, the family photos on the wall, and feeling the emptiness. The feeling of someone who had sacrificed everything, who had lived fully for others, but in the end, received nothing in return. I had once thought that if I did everything, if I took care of the family well enough, people would love me, would see me. But now, I realize that love isn't something that can be bought with sacrifice, and I couldn't continue living in that illusion anymore. When I entered the kitchen, where I had spent thousands of hours cooking, preparing meals for the family, I realized that I no longer had the strength to continue. I no longer had the energy to cook with love, to care for the family unconditionally. I was exhausted. I looked at the cups, the bowls that I had used for so many years, and I saw them as symbols of fatigue, of depletion. These cups no longer brought joy. They were now just burdens without name. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't keep going as an invisible mother, a woman who only knew how to sacrifice. I needed to reclaim the right to live for myself. This was the moment for change. It was time to set boundaries for myself, to protect what was left. And I started with a small but powerful decision. I would not let Mark take advantage of me anymore. I couldn't let him treat me like an endless resource without ever acknowledging what I had done. I couldn't let him continue to live irresponsibly. The first thing I did was change the lock on the door. I didn't want Mark to be able to enter my house without my permission anymore. I hadn't done this in all these years because I always thought he needed me, that he couldn't live without me. But now, I realized I was wrong. I couldn't let myself be dragged into a life where I no longer felt valued. When I changed the lock, I felt a strange sense of liberation. It wasn't just about changing a physical lock, but a shift in my mind. I no longer wanted to live in the shadows of meaningless sacrifice. I didn't need to wait for recognition from Mark or anyone else. I needed to love and respect myself. Next, I canceled all the automatic payments I had set up for Mark. Insurance, phone bills, everything had to stop. I didn't want to keep paying for things I wasn't getting anything in return for. I didn't want to keep nurturing a relationship where I was the only one sacrificing. The feeling of doing that was indescribable. I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel remorse. I only felt relief, as if I had laid down a heavy burden. At that moment, I remembered the times when Mark and Katie told me they loved me, but never acted like it. They only loved me when they needed something from me, and I had allowed them to do that. I had allowed myself to become a shadow in my own life, someone who only gave without ever receiving. But now, I no longer wanted to live in that shadow. As I stood there, looking at the canceled payments, I felt like I was standing at the threshold of something new. It was time for me to live for myself, not to please anyone, but to find myself again, to rediscover my worth. I couldn't keep living in someone else's shadow. I couldn't keep sacrificing without receiving anything back. I needed to have my own life. And then I received a call from Mark. He said he would come home soon. I didn't feel joy or anticipation. No, I no longer needed his presence to feel valued. I wouldn't welcome him with open arms like I had before. I would greet him as an adult, as someone responsible for his own life. The feeling when I stepped into this house was completely different from before. Every time I came back, I could clearly feel the suffocating atmosphere, filled with familiarity. But today, I no longer felt the warmth or the protection I had always sought here. There were no children's voices, no laughter, no cozy evenings together. all that was left was an empty space. I opened the door and looked around, but it felt like I had just returned to another world. The house was still the same. Nothing had changed. The living room, where we used to sit and talk, share meals, now only contained lifeless objects. Things I had made beautiful, but now they no longer held any meaning. Everything was silent. I stood still for a moment, trying to take a deep breath, but the feeling of something weighing heavily on my chest made it hard to breathe easily. I wondered, had I been living in an illusion all these years? Was I living for myself, or just living to meet the expectations of my family, of those I loved? This question had haunted me the entire way back from the hospital. And now, standing at this threshold, I couldn't avoid facing it. My hand still gripped the key tightly. I had changed the lock. Just a small action, but it carried great significance. A significance I had been too afraid to do all these years because I always feared that if I did, I would lose the most important relationships in my life. But now, I realized that I couldn't keep living in my own shadow, sacrificing everything for others while forgetting myself. When I sat down on the old armchair in the living room, I felt something else, a sense of relief, as if I had just lifted a heavy burden. However, this feeling didn't last long because the doorbell rang, pulling me back to reality. My heart began to race. I knew who was standing outside. Mark. He was out there, holding the spare key. I didn't need to guess. His gaze and the way he stepped onto the porch were the answers. Since I changed the lock and canceled the automatic payments, I knew this day would come. And today was that day. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anxious. I didn't feel fear or hesitation, but instead, an unusual calmness. I was ready for this confrontation. I was no longer afraid to face the truths I had been avoiding all these years. I opened the door, and there he stood, still holding the spare key. His face darkened, his eyes filled with frustration. His lips were tightly pressed, but his eyes held a mix of anger and confusion. He stood there staring at me, saying nothing. A long silence stretched out, and I realized that this confrontation wouldn't be easy. "What is this, Mom?" Mark finally spoke, his voice heavy, a mix of confusion and anger. "You changed the lock, canceled all the automatic payments. Why did you do that? Are you trying to kick me out of here?" His words felt like a knife in my heart. Not because I felt hurt, but because I realized he didn't understand me. I had done everything to protect the family, but now he looked at me like a traitor. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't keep living in a relationship where I was the only one giving. It was time to protect myself. "I did it because I need to live for myself," I replied, my voice firm, without any wavering. "Mark, I've sacrificed for too long. I've done everything without getting anything in return. I've lived for you both, but I forgot that I need to live for myself too. I can't keep sacrificing anymore. It's time for me to set boundaries." Mark looked at me, saying nothing. His eyes still held anger, but there was also a hint of confusion. He didn't understand me, and I couldn't blame him. He had gotten used to me doing everything, used to me always being there, worrying about him, but never understanding that I needed care too. "Do you think I can't take care of myself?" Mark asked, his voice no longer as strong. He was trying to understand me, but perhaps he still wasn't ready to face the truth. "It's not that, Mark," I answered, gently but firmly. "You can take care of yourself. I know that. But you need to learn how to take responsibility for your life, not always rely on me to fix everything. I can't keep living in your shadow. I love you, but I need to love myself. I couldn't say everything I wanted to say. I couldn't expect him to understand immediately. But I hoped that one day he would realize that I did everything, not because I didn't want him to succeed, but because I wanted him to stand on his own. Just like me, it was time for me to stand on my own. Mark didn't say anything else. He stood silently for a moment, then sighed. "You always have your reasons," he said, his voice sad. "If that's what you want, then I have nothing more to say." And then he turned and walked out of the house. The door closed behind him, and I stood there, alone. But not the kind of loneliness I was used to. This time, I felt a sense of liberation. I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel like I had done something wrong. I had done what was right. I had started the journey to live for myself, not because I wanted to give up on my children, but because I realized that I needed to live for myself first. I couldn't keep sacrificing without getting anything in return. After Mark left, I felt lighter than ever. It felt like I had just laid down a heavy burden I had carried for so many years. I looked at the chair where Mark had sat, where he used to listen to me, where I had hoped time and again that he would understand me. But now, I no longer needed that understanding. I needed freedom, and I would find it. The days following the confrontation with Mark passed very slowly. Every morning, when I woke up, I could feel the silence that enveloped this house, as if everything in my life had been frozen. There were no more of Katie's laughter, no more of Mark's morning greetings. It was just me, alone, in the home I had built over the years. I looked around and felt the loneliness, not because there was no one to talk to, but because I was beginning to understand that I had lived for so long for others, forgetting about myself. I no longer had to chase after anyone, no longer had to please anyone. For the first time in my life, I had space and time for myself. But, like a warning, that feeling didn't come easily. Every morning, I still felt the emptiness in my heart. I couldn't deny that I loved Mark. I loved Katie. And I had sacrificed my entire life to protect this family. But that very realization also made me understand that I had never truly loved myself. I had lived to please those around me while never taking care of myself. This feeling made it impossible for me to stop thinking. I asked myself if I had done the right thing by changing the locks and canceling the automatic payments for Mark. Had I hurt him? But I also knew that I couldn't go back. I couldn't continue living in the shadow of meaningless sacrifices. I couldn't always be the person that Mark or Katie could rely on without ever taking responsibility for their own lives. And I had to learn how to love myself. A week later, I received a call. I looked at the screen and saw Mark's name. A wave of tension rose in my chest. I had mentally prepared myself to face this. I was ready for a conversation I didn't know how it would end. But I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. Mark wouldn't stop until he understood. I took a deep breath before pressing the answer button. "Mom, we need to talk." Mark's voice came through, without the anger from before, but still filled with disappointment. "I don't understand why you did this. I don't understand why you're pushing me away like this." I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence linger for a few seconds. I wanted to give myself some time to feel it, to not get swept away by his emotions. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm but resolute. Mark, I know you're angry, and I understand why you feel that way. But you need to understand one thing. I did what I did not because I don't love you, but because I love you too much. But I also need to love myself. I can't keep living in your shadow. I can't always be the one responsible for everything in this family. A long silence followed. Mark didn't say anything. I could feel the tension in his every breath, but there was nothing more I could do. I had made my decision. This was the turning point for me, for our family. I don't want you to leave me, Mom, Mark said, his voice trailing off, as if he was struggling with his emotions. I don't know what to do without you. You've always been the only one I could rely on. And now, you're saying you can't do that anymore? I listened quietly, and a part of me ached. Mark's words hurt, but I knew I had to remain firm. I couldn't keep being the one to help him. I had to let him stand on his own, take responsibility for his own life. Mark, I'm not leaving you. I will always be there when you need me. But you have to learn to stand on your own. Love is not endless sacrifice. Love is respect, understanding, and maturity. You can't always live in my shadow. You have to learn to take care of yourself. On the other end of the line, Mark sighed in frustration. Do you think I can't take care of myself? I've grown up. You don't need to do everything for me anymore. Yes, you've grown up, Mark, I replied, my voice firmer than ever. And I believe you can do it. But the important thing is that you have to trust yourself. You have to take responsibility for your life. I can't keep living for you. I need to live for myself, and that is what I will do. Another silence settled in, but this time, I didn't feel the tension. I felt at peace. I had spoken my truth and I didn't regret it. I couldn't continue living in the indifference and apathy of those around me. I couldn't continue being someone who sacrifices without receiving anything in return. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice softer. I understand now. You're right. I need to take care of myself. But I don't know where to start. You've done everything for me. I don't feel like I'm mature enough to do that. Don't worry, Mark, I said, my voice gentler but still firm. You'll learn. Everyone has to grow up in their own way, and you're no exception. But you have to walk your own path. I can't walk it for you. The conversation ended, and I sat quietly in the living room, feeling like I had just done something incredibly important. A part of me wanted to cry because of Mark's final words. But I knew this was something I had to do. I couldn't keep living in endless sacrifice without getting anything in return. That night, as I sat in my room, the dim light from the desk lamp casting shadows on the old photos on the table, I felt a new sensation. The feeling of freedom, not because I had resolved the issue with Mark, but because I could live for myself. I no longer felt like the person who always had to sacrifice, who had to do everything for the family. I had learned an important lesson. To love others, I first had to love myself. This feeling wasn't easy. I would have to face other challenges in the future. But I couldn't go back. I couldn't continue living in dependence on others. I needed to live for myself. Every morning when I wake up, I feel something different. It's not an abrupt or drastic change, but a quiet stillness, as if I've discovered a part of peace I never knew before. After so many long, exhausting days of trying to make everything perfect, I began to realize that peace isn't something distant. It's something I can find right within myself, in the quiet moments of life, when there are no worries and no need to chase after anyone's expectations. And then, as part of this change, I began to notice that the small steps in life, like a morning stroll in the park or simply sitting down to read a book, became precious moments that I had never taken time for before. Lately, I've continued to visit that park, where I met the old woman, someone I never expected would change my life in such a gentle but profound way. She was an elderly woman with silver hair, a gentle face, but her eyes were bright and full of understanding. Every time I went, she was always by the flowers, tending to them with such care, as if she knew that each flower needed patience and love to bloom. Today, I met her again, and she invited me to sit with her. By now, I no longer felt the shyness I had when I first met her. I found it easy to share my thoughts, as if she was the person I had been looking for to confide in. I don't know why, but there was something strange about how safe I felt every time I sat with her, as if I could freely express the feelings I had never dared to share. "Are you here alone?" she asked, her eyes still focused on the flowers. Her question was gentle, but it felt like a soft touch on my heart. "Yes," I replied, my voice hesitant. "I've started walking alone now, no longer chasing anyone." She smiled, looking at me with understanding in her eyes. "That's the first step, isn't it? You've stepped out of the darkness of yourself. That's the most important thing. Don't be afraid to walk alone, because in that stillness, you will find the precious things you never noticed before." I don't know why, but her words made me suddenly realize something I had forgotten for so long. All those years before, I had lived for others, always busy with responsibilities I thought were necessary. I had forgotten about myself. I had forgotten that I too had the right to live for myself, to pursue the hobbies and passions I had lost, while focusing so much on family and those I loved. "Thank you," I said, my voice soft, but full of gratitude. "You've probably helped me realize something very important, that I need to learn how to live for myself, not just for the expectations of others." She smiled gently and nodded, as if she had known all along that I would understand. "That's right. When you learn to live for yourself, you'll see life becoming lighter and more beautiful. Sometimes, all it takes is a little patience with yourself, and you'll realize you don't need to be everything to someone, just need to be yourself." We sat there, saying nothing more, just listening to the sound of leaves falling and birds singing in the park. I felt a strange peace in my heart. It was a peace I had never known before, a peace I had forgotten for so long because of worries and endless sacrifices. After that conversation, I began to change little by little. Each day, I spent more time on myself, not just doing mundane chores or things I felt I had to do, but small, meaningful things. I started reading books every morning, walking in the park, taking time for hobbies I never had time for before. Every day, I went to the park, and each time, I met her. She was always by the flowers, tending to them, just like she had tended to me. One day she asked me, "Have you ever thought about planting a flower for yourself? That flower won't just be a flower, it will be a part of you." Her words made me think deeply. I had never thought about caring for a flower of my own, but she was right. Every flower needed care, patience, and love to bloom, and so did I. I needed to take care of myself, not just for others, but for me. That flower would symbolize my new life, a life where I would no longer chase the expectations of others, but live on my own terms. I decided to do what she suggested. One morning, I went to a plant shop and bought a rose, a beautiful flower, but one that also needed care and patience. I brought it home and placed it in my workspace, where I would take time each day to care for it. I felt like I was planting my life again, step by step, not rushing. Every day, I spent time taking care of that rose. I watered it, trimmed its wilted branches, and watched as its petals slowly began to bloom. Just like me, that rose needed time to grow, patience to become whole. And just like me, it needed love to bloom. A month passed and my rose had begun to bloom, its bright red petals beautiful and strong. I looked at them and realized something. I no longer felt like a mother who only knew sacrifice. I no longer felt like I was invisible in the lives of those around me. I was a woman, and I had the right to live for myself. I had the right to love myself and take care of my life, just as I cared for that rose. Once again, I met her in the park. This time, I didn't just thank her for her advice. I shared with her about the rose I had planted. "You were right," I said, my voice softer. "That rose isn't just a flower, it's a part of me. It helps me realize that I need to take care of myself. And when I do, everything around me becomes more beautiful." She smiled, her eyes full of understanding. "I knew you would understand. That rose will bloom, just as you will bloom in your life. You will find joy and peace in yourself." And I knew that was the truth. I had started a new journey, a journey not to please anyone, but to live for myself, to love and take care of myself, and to let my life bloom like the roses in the garden. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The first feeling when I opened my eyes was a sense of relief, as if I had freed myself from an invisible burden. This house, although it still held the familiar belongings, now felt different. It was no longer just a place where I worked and took care of the family, but a place where I could begin a new journey, a journey of change, of living for myself. I no longer saw the old objects, the traces of a past I had always tried to preserve. Everything started to take on a new meaning. When I walked into my old bedroom, the place where I had spent countless sleepless nights caring for my family, I felt something different. This room had once been where I slept, but it was also where I neglected my own needs. It was a room with no space for me, where I had poured all my energy into endless tasks. But today, I decided it would no longer be that old place. I couldn't continue living in a space filled only with memories of sacrifice and exhaustion. I would transform it into a new space, a space for myself, for the dreams I had never dared to pursue. The first step was to clear everything out. I didn't want to keep the old belongings, the things I once thought were necessary. I got rid of everything I no longer needed. The paintings, the decorations I had used to beautify this house, but which I no longer felt connected to. I wanted a new space, a place where I could start fresh, where I could set new goals for myself. I bought a small desk, a comfortable chair, and a bookshelf to begin organizing the space. Everything was carefully chosen, not because of its material value, but because it gave me a sense of freedom and comfort. This would be my space, where I could rediscover myself, where I could relax, read, write, or simply sit down and enjoy a cup of tea in quiet. With every step of cleaning, I felt like I was erasing the traces of an old life, a life that revolved around taking care of others and not taking care of myself. In this way, I wasn't just changing the space, but also changing myself. I no longer wanted to be the woman who only knew how to sacrifice while forgetting herself. I wanted to be the woman who is free, who has the right to live for herself, who has the right to pursue the things she's passionate about without feeling guilty. The next day, when I finished rearranging the bedroom, I stood in the middle of the room and looked around. It felt strange, as if I had rebuilt a part of myself. This bedroom was no longer the place of exhaustion, of sleepless nights spent worrying about others. It was now a place where I could do what I love, where I could rest and start again. I decided to hang a painting on the wall, a painting I had created in my youth but never dared to display. It depicted a woman standing by the sea, looking out at the horizon. I had painted this when I was young, but never dared to look at it because I thought I wasn't capable of pursuing my dreams. But now, that painting had become my symbol of change, of my decision to live for myself. After everything was done, I sat down in my new chair, looked out the window, and enjoyed a cup of tea. This feeling was truly wonderful. I no longer felt exhausted, no longer felt like just a mother, a wife who sacrificed everything and forgot herself. I felt like I had returned to myself as an independent, free, and strong woman. However, a strange feeling arose within me. I remembered the old days, the moments when I saw Mark and Katie grow up, when I did everything for them without ever asking for anything for myself. I couldn't deny that I loved them deeply. But now, I realized that love couldn't only be about endless sacrifice. Love had to be reciprocal, built on respect and understanding. I had sacrificed so much, but I couldn't continue doing so forever. At that moment, I received a text from Katie. She didn't call, just sent a short message. "Mom, I want to talk to you." The message made my heart tighten. I didn't know what Katie wanted, but I also knew that she would eventually have to face the changes in our family. The decisions I had made would inevitably affect her. I felt a little anxious. She wouldn't understand my decisions, and I couldn't explain everything to her right away. But I also knew I couldn't continue living for others' approval. If I didn't change, I would forever live in meaningless sacrifice and loss. The next day, Katie came to visit. By then, I was ready for the conversation. I didn't know how it would go, but I knew I couldn't keep avoiding it. I was no longer the mother who tried to do everything to please my children. I had to be the strong mother, the mother who could protect herself and not let her sacrifices be taken advantage of. Katie stepped into the room, looked around, and touched the new items in the room. She didn't say anything, but I could sense her discomfort in her eyes. She wasn't used to this change. The old things, the old habits we had, were no longer there. I was no longer the mother she once knew. "Mom, what's going on?" Katie asked, her voice sounding frustrated. "Why have you changed like this? Why aren't you doing everything I need anymore?" I sat down in the chair, looked at her, and spoke softly but firmly. "Katie, I've spent my whole life taking care of you and Mark, but I also need to take care of myself. I can't keep living for you and forgetting about myself. I love you both, but I also have the right to love and live for myself." Katie stood silently, not saying anything. I could feel the confusion in her eyes. She wasn't ready to understand what I was saying, but I knew that one day she would. This wasn't abandonment. It was a necessary change. That day, as I sat in my new office, the space still smelled of fresh wood and the carefully chosen decorations. A strange sense of peace spread throughout my body. In front of me was a small desk with books I had revisited in recent times. a comfortable chair where I could sit and take time for myself without feeling guilty. In this space, I no longer felt like the mother who did everything for others, no longer felt the need to sacrifice for the demands of the family. I began to feel that I deserved to be loved and cared for, not just because I was someone's mother, but because I am myself. Although I could feel the change within me, a part of me still couldn't completely let go of the past. I still felt some regret, a sense of emptiness, and especially memories of endless arguments and the sacrifices I made without ever receiving anything in return. Sometimes, those feelings would come back strongly, as if I were facing a truth I couldn't change. And then, I realized that it wasn't just Mark who needed to forgive me, but I also needed to forgive myself. Forgive myself for the things I had done without receiving. Forgive myself for not realizing my worth long ago. I sat down, took a blank sheet of paper, and began to write. It wasn't a letter to anyone else, but a letter to myself. The words I wrote weren't for explanation, but to help me understand that I needed to free myself from the guilt, the pent-up emotions I had suppressed for so long. Letter to myself, I wrote at the top of the page, and then continued. For all these years, I have lived for the family, for others. I have given everything but received nothing in return. I have sacrificed and forgotten myself, forgotten the things I wanted, forgotten the dreams that were buried. I have done everything I could, but no one saw, no one understood. At some point, I realized I was tired. I couldn't keep living like this. I need to live for myself. I need to love myself as I have loved others. I paused for a moment, reflecting on what I had just written. These words, though simple, carried great weight for me. This was the first time I was facing this truth, the truth about the meaningless sacrifices I had lived through all these years. Everything started to become clearer. I had not just lived for my children, but for a part of myself I had lost. The part of me I wasn't sure still existed. That part of me had been buried under millions of concerns for my family, for others. And now, I needed to find it again. I continued to write. Today, I will no longer do everything for you. I will not respond to unreasonable requests. I will not let anyone take advantage of my kindness anymore. I have loved you. I have given everything. But now I need to love myself. I don't need your approval. I don't need your understanding. I just need to understand myself. I cannot continue to live in the shadow of those expectations. I will live for me. And that is the freedom I have been searching for. As I wrote these lines, an unusual sense of relief rose within me. I no longer felt guilty. I no longer felt like the only one who had to carry everything. For the first time in my life, I understood that sacrifice without proper recognition, without understanding, would only hurt myself. My relationship with Mark, with the family, had to change. And I couldn't do that if I didn't change myself first. I left the letter on the table for a moment, looked at it, then slowly reached out to pick it up. I looked at the words I had written, and this time, I knew I couldn't leave any regrets. I decided to burn the letter, not to erase the past, but to free myself from those heavy emotions. It was a symbolic act, but one that carried immense significance in my process of change. The letter burned in the fire, and I watched as the pieces of paper withered away in the thin smoke. I felt the relief, the lightness, and also the end of a chapter in my life. I was no longer the mother who only knew how to give. I was no longer the wife who only knew sacrifice, but a woman who had the right to love herself. and I would no longer allow anyone, whether my children or my family, to take away my right to live. When the letter had burned completely, I stood up, feeling the change within me. This feeling didn't resemble complete letting go, but rebirth. I hadn't forgotten the past. I had simply stopped letting it control my life. I was Linda, a woman who had the right to live for herself. At that moment, my phone rang. It was a text message from Katie. This time, it wasn't a question. It wasn't blame or reproach, but a simple message. Mom, I love you. When I saw those words, I felt something soften inside my heart. I knew that although Katie couldn't fully understand what I was doing, her love for me still existed. I hadn't abandoned my children. I was just learning how not to sacrifice myself for them. I replied, I love you so much too. I'm learning how to love myself. After sending the message, I felt like I had taken a stronger step on my journey. I no longer felt like the perfect mother, the dutiful wife, but a complete woman with her own feelings and desires. The next day, I went to the park as usual. Just as I was about to sit on my favorite bench, I saw the old woman sitting alone, holding a book. She looked at me, her eyes as if they had been waiting for me for a long time. Hello. It seems you found some peace in your heart today. She smiled gently, her voice soft but full of understanding. Yes. I smiled, feeling lighthearted. I feel like I've let go of a lot. She nodded, her eyes bright, as if she had known this moment was coming. Congratulations. That's the most important step. You've started to love yourself. And when you do, you will see that everything around you becomes more beautiful. I looked at her, feeling the warmth in her gaze. She didn't need to say much. With just a few gentle words, she had helped me see a different path, a path I could freely walk without living for others' expectations. When I woke up that morning, the atmosphere in the house was noticeably different from what I had known for so many years. In the past, this house was always filled with noise. Katie's laughter, Mark's yelling, the sounds of busy household chores that I always did unconsciously. But now, everything was quiet, and that silence didn't make me feel lonely. On the contrary, I felt free, as if I had freed myself from a life I had lived for others for too long. Each morning, I woke up no longer feeling weighed down, no longer worrying about what someone needed from me. The room where I once slept, where I lay with the worries about my family, had now become an entirely new space. I no longer had to worry about whether Mark would show up or if Katie would call me whenever she needed help. All those things were no longer the focus of my life. I wasn't lonely. I felt a strange happiness, knowing that I was living true to myself. That morning, as I sat drinking tea and looking out the window, I couldn't help but reflect on what I had been through. The years of sacrifice, the relationships filled with expectations I tried to maintain, and ultimately, my awakening. I understood that in order to love others, I first had to love myself. And that was something I had never done for many years. But now, I could love myself sincerely. While I sat reflecting on what I had gone through, my phone rang. It was a text from Katie. My heart tightened a little. I didn't know what she would say, whether she had begun to understand any of my decisions, but I had mentally prepared myself for anything. Katie wants to see you. Can we talk? The short message was heavy with meaning. A part of me wanted to avoid it, to continue living in my peace. But I knew I couldn't live like that forever. To truly change, I had to face everything. even the hardest things. I couldn't keep running from relationships I had once held dear, even though I had done so for many years. Now, I could no longer avoid it. I took a deep breath and replied, "I'll meet you. We need to talk." Katie arranged to meet me at a cafe near home, a place we had visited many times before. A small cafe with a cozy atmosphere, featuring art on the walls and soft music in the background. Places like that had always made me feel comfortable, but this time, it made me feel a little anxious. I didn't know where this conversation would lead, and I didn't know if Katie would understand why I had decided to change everything. When I arrived at the cafe, Katie was sitting in a corner, holding a cup of coffee. She saw me and smiled, but her eyes were a little distant. It wasn't anger or disappointment, but a confusion, a strangeness between us, after all the changes I'd made. I sat down across from her, and we began the conversation. "Mom," Katie started, her voice softer. "I don't understand. You've changed so much. I feel like I'm not your daughter anymore." Her words made my heart ache, but I knew she was right. The changes I had made weren't easy for her. Katie had gotten used to me always being there, always ready to do everything for her. And now, she had to face a mother who wasn't the same. I wasn't the same woman anymore. "You're not no longer my daughter," I answered, my voice calm but firm. "I'm still your mother, but I need to change. I've lived too long for others. I've sacrificed too much without receiving anything in return. I love you, and I always will, but I can't live for you anymore. I have to live for myself." Katie was silent for a long time. I saw the pain in her eyes, but I also saw the confusion, as if she couldn't fully understand what I was saying. She wasn't used to this change, but I knew this was the necessary step. We couldn't keep living in mutual dependency, in relationships where only one side sacrifices without receiving anything back. This wasn't abandonment. This was the affirmation that everyone needs space to grow and find their own happiness. "Mom, I don't know," Katie began, her voice choked. "I know you're doing this because you want what's best for me, but I really don't understand you anymore. Why are you doing this?" "You don't have to understand immediately, Katie," I said, my gaze softening. "I love you, but I can't live in meaningless sacrifice anymore. I've spent my whole life trying to please others, to meet the family's expectations, but I forgot that I also have the right to live for myself. I didn't know how to love myself. And now I have to do that, because only when I love myself can I love you completely." We both sat in silence for a moment, not saying anything. I could feel the tension in the air, but there was also a sense of relief in my heart. It was the first time I had expressed what I was feeling, and I knew it was the right thing. It was time for me to live for myself, to no longer feel like a shadow in my own life. After a while, Katie sighed and said, "I don't fully understand, but I know you're doing this because you want what's best for me. I'll try to understand you more, Mom." I smiled softly, feeling warmth in my heart. Even though Katie didn't fully understand yet, I knew she would gradually come to realize. This change didn't just affect me, but our whole family. We needed to learn to live independently, to learn how to love ourselves and respect each other more. "Thank you, honey," I said gently. "I love you very much, Katie, and I'll always be here. But I need to live for myself. I will find myself again, and so will you." A sense of relief slowly filled my heart. This conversation didn't just help me understand my daughter better, but also made me realize that change is not always easy. But it's the necessary step for all of us to grow, to live fuller lives. At the end of this journey, I look back at everything and realize that not all that I have gone through was meaningless. The pain, the sacrifices, and the tears I shed were not failures. They were lessons, stepping stones that helped me understand that I deserve to be loved, respected, and to live a life not dictated by others' expectations. Each of us has the right to find ourselves, even in the most difficult circumstances. Sometimes, change doesn't come from big decisions, but simply from beginning to love ourselves, whether or not the people around us understand. I didn't need to wait for forgiveness from Mark, from Katie, or anyone else. I needed forgiveness from myself, and when I did that, I found freedom. It's not about revenge or the failure of others, but about self-liberation and reclaiming the right to live for oneself. And that is the greatest victory in the life of every woman. Because when we find peace within ourselves, we have won everything. My story is not a simple one. It's not just about suffering and sacrifice, but about rebirth, freedom, and starting over. I believe that anyone, no matter their age or how many challenges they face, can find their own path. A path not of acceptance, but of self-respect and self-love. So, are you ready to love yourself? Are you living for someone else rather than for yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below so that together we can create a strong community where freedom and self-love are the most important things. Because in the end, the most important thing in life is the peace and freedom within each of us, and you deserve to have that.